Okay, this morning we're going to talk about Genesis 13, and whilst I fiddle with my phone, if you remember nothing else this morning, 3 things to listen out for. We need to develop a mindset of love, not selfishness, which probably is a bit innate otherwise. And we need to love other people even when they let us down and continue to do that. And we need to live like the kingdom is a reality now. Now, because I'm a little bit tech challenged, the reading is a couple of Sunday school students, so if you can turn to Genesis chapter 13, and they will just read that through for us. Haven't told the AV people this, so I'm sure they're very excited. Let's go. Yep, that worked as expected. Not at all. Let's try again. I saw what I did wrong, sorry.
So Abram went up to Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abraham became very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From Negev he went to the place, and from to the other place, until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. Then Abram called upon the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. But the land could not support them while they stayed together, for the possessions which they had were not able to stay together. And they quarreled between Abram's herds and Lot's. The Canaanites and the Perizzites were also living in the land at that time. So Abram said to Lot, "Let's not have any more quarrels between you and me, nor between your herds and mine, for we are close relatives. It is not the whole land before you. Let's part ways. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go right, I'll go to the left."
Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan towards Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. This is before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out towards the east. The 2 men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, "Look around from where you are, to the north and the south, to the east and the west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you." So Sodom went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he pitched his tents. He built an altar to the Lord.
Okay. So thank you to those who volunteered for that reading, or voluntold, either way. So we know the background to Genesis 13. Unsurprisingly, those of you who are good at maths know it's Genesis 12. Genesis 12, we're introduced to the promises, a foundational part of the gospel. And we sit here this morning, as Paul said in Galatians 3, intimately connected to the promises that God made now 4,000 years ago. Because God's purpose is unchanged, undefeated, and is going to be accomplished. And that's why we're here. Because we believe whether we're male or female, Jew or Gentile, bond or free, regardless of our social circumstance or anything else, by faith we can be part of God's purpose. And that's one thing that just binds us together this morning. But just because we're children of the promise doesn't make us perfect. And in Genesis 12 we see Abraham, when there was a famine, went scuttling off down to Egypt because he couldn't take the heat in the land of Canaan, and things didn't go a whole lot better. He lied about his relationship with Sarah, essentially put his wife into the Egyptian pharaoh's harem and accumulated a whole lot of wealth. Terrible plan. But God intervenes. Abraham, unsurprisingly, banished, comes back, and Genesis 13 is a restart. It's a reset for Abraham. We read that in verse 3 and 4. He returned to the place where he'd pitched his tent at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, and this is the place he first built the altar, and there he worshipped the Lord. So Abraham has had a reset. And sometimes we need to have a reset. We need to go back to the beginning. You know, as a community, as individuals, sometimes it's good for us to go back to, first principles, to rediscovering what it was that first attracted us to a relationship with God and with his Son. Because, life is not going to go smooth and we're going to make mistakes. Probably, hopefully, none of us are going to do some of the things that Abraham did, but in our own way, we're going to need to reset. Young people. There are young people here today who are not baptised. Some may be on the cusp, some not so sure. Some, like young Timothy, recently baptised. And it can be a tough thing to realise. Actually, we don't enter into a relationship because we're perfect, because we've arrived, because we're never going to waver again. I can remember growing up as a kid, I was sort of going through for baptism a bit, and we had a corridor in our house. It wasn't a super long corridor, but it was long enough. And every now and then you'd hear Dad start to walk down the corridor when you're in your bedroom. You're like, oh. And he'd come down the corridor, light footsteps. And you'd think, I hope he's going to my sister's room. But he'd walk past that door and you're like, okay, if he turns right, that's my brother's, I'm good. He turns left. He walked in and he sat on my bed as I sat at my desk procrastinating for my next exam. And he said to me, your problem is, Daniel, you are waiting for a light like a road to Emmaus, like a light from the sky to tell you you have arrived at faith, you're all good, and you'll never waver again. And that's not how faith is. And it's true. One of my favourite verses in the Bible, sorry for sucking on the things, I've got traveller's cough. One of the things, favourite passages in the Bible where the Father says to the Lord, look, help my unbelief. Faith is something which is going to wax and wane. There needs to be times where we need to start again. And Abraham, who's the father of the faithful, the man who first received the promises, the very second chapter about him, he needs to start again. That's going to happen. And we're here this morning because we acknowledge we're not perfect. We need sometimes to start over. Well, Genesis 13, we run into, Abraham's starting over, but there's a new complication. And the complication, ironically, is the blessing that God had given him and to Lot of some of the wealth they'd accumulated down in Egypt. It caused strife. As we read in verse 6 and 7, the land couldn't support them. There wasn't enough pasture for all the herds they'd accumulated. So quarrels start, fights start between Abraham and Lot's herdsmen. I love some of the little things in Scripture sometimes. You see at the end of verse 7 in Genesis 13, it says, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were living in the land at that time. You're like, who cares? What's that there for? Well, strange thing is, if you go back into Genesis 12, before the famine that you could not possibly survive, absolutely catastrophic, Abraham had to flee out of the land of Canaan. We read in Genesis 12 verse 6, at that time the Canaanites were in the land. So Abraham has to get out because, the famine's too hot. Remarkably though, the Canaanites survived. They survived. And now, despite, they never needed to quit and flee, and now you've got friction between Abraham and Lot, but at the very same time, the narrator just puts in here, just quietly, the Canaanites and the Perizzites are both in the land. Two groups of people living in apparent harmony, Canaanites and the Perizzites. Probably means the city dwellers and the country folk. We're not entirely sure, but there they were, living there in a degree of harmony. Now, why is it, and we'll go to our second reader here, why is it that sometimes it seems like children of the world can find peace when we can't. Luke chapter 16, verse 8.
For the people of this world are more crafty in dealing with their own kind than are people of the light.
How is it? Conflict happens everywhere. And I'm sure the Canaanites and the Perizzites, had a certain amount of conflict between them. But conflict seems doubly distressing when it happens within the family of promise, doesn't it? We know that. And we do sometimes have, tension or conflict between us, which shouldn't be there. But there is. And that can hurt a lot more because we expect it less in the family of God. Canaanites and Perizzites appear to be living at peace. And here's the people of promise, Abraham and Lot, conflict between them. Pretty Well, Abraham seeks to deal with the conflict. We know that, we see that in verse 8 and 9. He was the senior person, Lot was his nephew. It should have been that if there was going to be any, separation or split up of the land, whatever, Abraham should have been the person who got to pick first, who got the best of what was going around. But it's Abraham who says to Lot, we need to stop the quarrelling, pick what you want, I'll go the other way. You can pick first. Conflict always escalates. We know that's true. And it's very easy sometimes in conflict for us to stand for what is right, for us to stand on, our rights. But that's not the way of people of faith, and it wasn't the way of Abraham. Our Lord in Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, said this.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God.
Making peace is hard, requires sacrifice. Abraham was older, senior. He was the one who had all the rights, but he is the one who chose to make peace, who chose to sacrifice, who put himself behind. And I think this is a demonstration of why God wanted to work with Abraham, because he was this sort of character. He goes well beyond what is fair to make peace, to create a solution which actually tramples on his position, his authority, his rights, what was fair. And we know, given the choice, that Lot makes the wrong choice. In verse 10-11, he chooses the region of Jordan. And we know the previous 11 chapters, 12 chapters of Genesis. And there's a couple of little echoes there in some of the ominous notes of history. Conflict in the family, looking at the forbidden fruit and then moving east. These are all things that go along with failure. Lot's repeating part of the story. Abraham is breaking out into a new direction. But there's a fundamental difference of mindset that we really want to hone in on with Abraham versus Lot that has been demonstrated in this chapter. Walter Brueggemann, a guy that I like reading, he said, the matter of dividing up the wealth is a place at which the power of promise and the ideology of scarcity come into urgent conflict. That's really clear. So we'll be done now. What does he mean? The power of promise and the ideology of scarcity come into urgent conflict. Almost every economic model you can find, whether it's capitalism, communism, something in between, assumes at its core that scarcity is a given. There's only so much stuff to go around. There's only so much gold, only so much money, land, ocean views, broadband capacity in our house. We have limited resources, and that's not always a bad thing that, people think scarcity. That's why we have to become more efficient. That's why we have to invent cool things like, cars, phones, houses that don't leak, and not so cool things, social media, whatever. But all of economic growth and improved living conditions comes because of scarcity. That's economics. And Lot, like all humans, understood scarcity. He picks the best land for himself because there's only so much good land. But if he's got that, it means his flocks, his family are going to prosper. Think of all the goats he'll be able to give his children at Christmas. They'll be so pleased. There's only so much good stuff to go around. Children are naturally masters of the theory of economic scarcity. Right? Applied economics, they inherently understand. I mean, they might learn to say mum or dad first, but very quickly after that, especially if they're siblings, kids learn important words like mine, no. I don't think they learn get lost, but sharing is a challenge. But me, mine, my toy, my things, my stuff, they're really good at that. Masters of applied economics, the theory of scarcity. They just get that absolutely intuitively. Abraham didn't have that sort of mindset though. Abraham understood the power of the promise. God promised him an abundance in Genesis 12. Those who bless you, I will bless. You are going to be, rich beyond measure. Scarcity is not a constraint with God. We're not free market Christians. There's no such thing. We don't accept the thinking of scarcity. As John the Baptist said in Luke 3, if you've got 2 tunics, give one to someone who needs. If you've got extra food, give to the person who's hungry. We're not about accumulating for ourselves. We don't buy into that sort of world. We're not called to accumulate wealth, to follow those good economic principles. We're asked instead to follow the ideal of love, the power of the promise of sharing. Storing up riches for ourselves, said Jesus, is foolishness. Our priority is being rich toward God. That's a different mindset. It's not buying into me, mine, no. It's about sharing and love. And let's be clear. Children also have a tremendous capacity to learn love too. And as parents, we try and teach them to love, to share, to demonstrate a generosity of spirit. And that's what God's trying to develop in us, because love sees God's abundance. Whatever cost, whatever is happening today, we see that there is a bigger plan that God has, and that's what Abraham was able to see. And the reality is, both tendencies are there with children, both tendencies are there with us. The ability to be selfish, the ability to demonstrate love. Love is the characteristic that our Lord is looking for, and we know that it's special, and we will just try and master this again. Here we go.
Love is kind, it is not envious. Love does not brag, it is not puffed up. It is not rude, it is not self-serving, it is not easily angered or resentful. It is not glad about injustice, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things.
Abraham was demonstrating love. He was tremendously patient with Lot. He wasn't envious, he wasn't proud, he wasn't self-serving, he didn't get angry when Lot grasped at the best for himself. He was prepared to sacrifice. James 4, slightly different context, verse 1 and 2 says, where do quarrellings, where does strife come, as was evident between the household of Abraham and Lot? Where does that all come from? It comes from your own passions that battle within you, says James. You desire, you don't have, you murder, you envy, you cannot obtain, you quarrel and fight. We have that mindset of selfishness. It leads to division, it leads to conflict. It's completely contrary to the sacrifice and the love of those who want to be peacemakers. God has provided us with a powerful weekly prompt to remember his love. Romans 5 verse 8 says, while we were unlovable sinners, Christ died for us. That's how love is demonstrated and what we're brought to be reminded of every day, or every Sunday. So a quotation, again from someone else, Martin Luther King Jr. We must discover the power of love, the redemptive power of love. And when we discover that, we will be able to make of this old world a new world. We will be able to make men better. Love is the only way. Jesus discovered that. We cannot transform people by more jealousy, more selfishness, more conflict, by standing on our digs and demonstrating that we are right. Those things don't de-escalate conflict. but love can. Sure, love doesn't always provoke a positive response in the other person. Love won't always be effective in bringing peace, but it's the only viable choice. It's the only way which may work. It's the only possibility. And we're called to continually show love. You think about Abraham in this instant. He put himself second. He was prepared to let Lot go first. He could then have just washed his hands of Lot. He could have said, well, you've made your choice. Off you go, you're done. And, we have people in our lives who can hurt us, who we feel have walked out on us or aren't around the way we want them to be, have benefited at our expense, whatever it is. Like all of us, I suspect, have people where we've had that sort of experience in our lives. Well, look at Abraham's example. In Genesis 14, the very next chapter, Lot gets caught up in an international conflict and taken off as a slave. Abraham could have said, oh, well, God's judged him and he's got what he deserved. He was mixing it with the people of Sodom, evil place, just desserts. Abraham straps his sword on and risks everything to go and save his nephew. And when he saves him, he doesn't give him a good lecture. He lets Lot make whatever choices Lot wants to make. And in Genesis 18, when the angels say they're going down to check on Sodom, Abraham intervenes on behalf of Lot. And if you just pull back and think, okay, well, what is Abraham doing? Abraham says, look, if there's 50 righteous, godly people there, you wouldn't destroy the city if there's 50 people. What does that mean? I think it means that Abraham believed that there was 50 people in the household of Lot who were still faithful. And then he sort of gets a bit nervous and hedges his bets a little bit and negotiates the number down. And finally he's like, okay, well, if there's 5 righteous people, you won't destroy the city, Lord. Yeah, no, it's good for 5. And Abraham's comfortable. Abraham, I think, goes to bed confident that everything's going to be fine with Lot now. I think he did the maths and went, Lot, his wife, at least 2 unmarried daughters, at least 2 married daughters, that's 6. And then there's the boyfriends and the husbands. So there has to be at least 5 righteous people. I can sleep easy. That was the confidence. That was the thinking well, thinking good of others that Abraham demonstrated. That was the love that Abraham demonstrated to someone who walked out on him, who let him down. Abraham was there for Lot. His love believed all things, believed all good things about the spiritual health of Lot, about his potential and about his household. And I think there was personal pain in that decision that Lot made that caused Abraham pain. I believe in the context of Genesis 12 through to 19 that Abraham genuinely believed that Lot was going to be his heir, that Lot was the basis on which the promises would be fulfilled because he was his male, near relative, right, his nephew. And later on, when that all falls apart, he thinks maybe it's Eliezer, then there's the debacle with Hagar. But I think early on, he thinks Lot is fundamental to the future of the promises. So when Lot leaves, Abraham takes an almighty hit. He understood how God's purpose would work. The near-term and the long-term future and health of his ecclesia was secure, if you like. But now he doesn't know how things are going to go. How are they going to carry on? How is God going to work in his house without Lot? I mean, the entire purpose of God has been frustrated by this breakdown. A lot of doubt. What do the promises mean if we're not sure how to step forward? And I think the chapter demonstrates how loving, how caring our God is in dealing with our doubts and our fears. God knew what Abraham needed. He needed to go back to basics. He needed reaffirmation of the fundamentals. And God, kind of repeats the promises to Abraham, not identically to Genesis 12. There's no mention of your name will be a blessing, curse those, bless those, any of that. That's not there. After Lot departed, that's the trigger, the Lord says to Abram in verse 14 and 15, Look up from the place where you stand, to the north, south, east, and west. I will give you all the land that you see, and to your descendants forever. Lot lifted up his eyes and he saw the good stuff, just that narrow strip of the Jordan Valley. God says, no, lift up your eyes and look everywhere, because I'm giving you the abundance of the promises, every single scrap of land. No need for choosing, no need for choice. This is the abundance. This is the love of God. And he continues in verse 6, specific, I think, to the fear and concern of Abraham having lost the obvious way the promises would be fulfilled. He says, I'll make your descendants like the dust of the earth. So if anyone's able to count the dust of the earth, then your descendants can also be counted. You might not understand Abram. You might think the purpose of God has gone backwards. You might think, that everything is falling apart around you. But my purpose, says God, has not been derailed. In fact, it's bigger than I've previously even told you. Abraham was previously told he would have a seed. He wasn't told that they'd be so numerous that they'd be like the dust of the earth. Abraham feared that the purpose of God was shrinking and going backwards. God's like, no, it's bigger than you can imagine, Abraham. Way more expansive than you've previously realised. And that's our God. His love and the abundance of his love exceeds our understanding and expectation and stands in contrast to perhaps our natural tendency to selfishness, to thinking that we can build the house, accumulate and prosper, and it has to be in the way that we imagine. God's purpose is not frustrated by changes in his family. Abraham is then given an instruction in verse 17. Get up, walk through the land, for I will give it you. Now, in the Old Testament, walking through the land, walking over a field or through a patch of dirt was a significant symbolic act. It was a demonstration of ownership, and the sandal was used in legal transactions to buy and sell land. You get a hint of that in Ruth 4, but contemporaneous literature gives us far more. Abraham was asked, live your faith. I've promised you the land. You don't own a square inch of it. But I want you to get up and start walking through the land, demonstrating by your actions that you believe the promise. I want you to live as if the promise has already been fulfilled. To demonstrate that faith in a very, very practical way. Abraham didn't grasp the entirety of God's plan. And in preceding chapters, God is going to expand his understanding, make him realise that it's going to be the seed, the promise is going to come through him and Sarah personally, all that. But at this point in time, God's like, no. What you need now is just to understand that I've got this. It's bigger than you understand, and I want you just to walk forward with that. Nothing more. Just walk through the land. Live like you'll be in the kingdom for sure. Don't doubt. Don't worry about it. As we're exhorted in Philippians chapter 1, verse 6. Be confident of this very thing, that he which has begun a good work in you will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ. Abraham's life is very, very different to ours. He lived in the Middle Bronze Age, which is just a mile away from our world, our life, our experience in a million ways. But God is the same. So, the 3 points, because you probably didn't pay attention when I said them first. We need someone's grinning because they know it's true. We need a love mindset, not one of scarcity. We need to continue loving others even when they let us down. And we need to live like the kingdom is a reality